Have you ever wished you could wake up stronger, calmer, and more in command of your life without some grand, exhaustive effort? What if I told you that while you sleep, your mind could be training itself to become wiser, more resilient, and completely unshakable? Most people don't realize that the thoughts they carry to bed with them are the very architects of their life. If you fall asleep with the weight of stress, anxiety, or regret, your brain absorbs it like a sponge. But what if you were to fill your mind with wisdom just before you sleep? What if you allowed the greatest minds in history to whisper powerful lessons into your subconscious? Then you don't just sleep, you transform. It's a strange paradox, isn't it? We spend our waking hours trying to fix our lives from the outside in, yet we neglect the most powerful hours of all, those that unfold at night when the conscious mind lets go and the subconscious takes over. The ancient Stoics understood this long before science could confirm it. Marcus Aurelius didn't forge one of the most disciplined minds in history by chance. His strength was born from intentional thought, from quiet reflection, and from the discipline to guide his mind before it drifted into dreams. The Stoics knew a fundamental truth. If you don't program your mind, the world will program it for you, and the world rarely programs you for peace. This is your chance to take back control, to stop waking with the same emotional weight you carried to bed. Because if your last thoughts at night are filled with clarity, strength, and timeless wisdom, your mornings will greet you with a mind already trained to lead, not just react. A mind that isn't pulled into chaos, but moves with purpose. And if this idea speaks to you, if it offers even a moment of clarity, there's a small but powerful way you can help us continue this work. Simply click the subscribe button. It's free, it takes a second, and it is the kind of support that allows this space to grow. Now, let us go deeper into the part no one talks about. What truly happens inside your mind when the world grows quiet, and how that stillness might just be the key to changing your entire life. Even when your eyes are closed and your body is still, your mind is awake. This is a truth most people overlook. They imagine sleep as a simple break from the day, a time when everything just shuts down. But the mind never truly rests. It slows, it quiets its volume, but beneath the surface, it continues to work. It listens, it processes, it absorbs. And what it absorbs in those final moments before sleep, the thoughts and emotions you bring with you into the night, can shape everything you feel the next day. This is not poetry. It is neurology. The subconscious is always on. While your conscious mind signs off, the subconscious continues to record and reinforce whatever patterns you have most recently fed it. As the psychologist Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is the heart of the matter. If you don't take an active role in shaping your inner world, it will be shaped by default, by fear, by old wounds, by whatever chaos you left unresolved at the end of the day. Most people go to bed carrying this weight, unknowingly handing it over to the subconscious to be woven deeper into their being. They wonder why they wake up anxious or unmotivated, not realizing they've been rehearsing those very feelings in the silence of the night. But herein lies the power. If the mind doesn't sleep, it can be trained. You don't need to be awake to rewire the way you think. You only need to be intentional about what you allow into your mind before it enters its most absorbent state. This is where the opportunity lives. Not in forcing change during the day, but in preparing the soil for it while the world is quiet and your mind is open. Aristotle believed that we are what we repeatedly do. But the idea extends beyond action into thought. We also become what we repeatedly think. Repetition carves pathways in the brain. The more a thought is rehearsed, the stronger its hold becomes. The brain doesn't discriminate between what is good for you and what is bad for you. It simply strengthens what it receives most often. If you constantly rehearse worry, worry becomes your baseline. But if you rehearse strength, perspective, and wisdom, those become the lenses through which you see the world. The Stoics knew this. They practiced nightly reflection not to punish themselves for the day's failings, but to purify the mind. In his meditations, Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts." This was not philosophy for its own sake. It was a strategy, a deliberate, daily training of the mind, so that even while resting, it would remain aligned with virtue. The way you speak to yourself before bed matters profoundly. It's easy to dismiss your internal chatter as harmless, but the mind is always listening. A single, self-critical thought whispered before sleep can echo for hours, imprinting itself upon you. The same is true for your doubts and frustrations. If you bring them to bed, your mind takes them seriously. It begins solving problems that don't need solving and creating fears out of hypotheticals. Slowly, quietly, it rewrites the story of your life. But you can't interrupt that process. The key is to choose what you repeat. This isn't about hollow affirmations. It's about choosing thoughts that hold truth and power. It's about reminding your mind of what you already know deep down, that you don't have to react to every emotion, that fear is a signal, not a fact, and that peace isn't found in the absence of challenge, but in the strength with which you face it. Plato once said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." That battle doesn't only happen in the light of day, it continues in the dark, in the quiet, when you are alone with your thoughts. That is when the real conditioning takes place. If you do not seize that time, it will seize you. You will start each morning already behind, carrying thoughts recycled from the night before. You aren't tired because you didn't rest. You're tired because your mind rehearsed chaos while your body tried to recover. When you take charge of what your mind consumes before sleep, you change the very ground you stand on when you wake. It doesn't have to be complex. A single line of wisdom, repeated with conviction, can carry more weight than hours of silent overthinking. The body will rest regardless, but the mind must be guided. Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." This must include the hours we pretend not to live, our time in sleep. If you never examine what you carry into that silence, you will be ruled by patterns you don't even recognize. Reprogramming your mind is not about force, it's about attention. It's about asking, what truth do I want my mind to carry into tomorrow? Start small. One sentence, one idea, one truth you wish to live by. Repeat it. Let it sink in. Let it replace the noise. Your mind is listening, even when you think you aren't. The more you guide it with wisdom, the more it begins to think in alignment with who you want to become. And that choice, though made in silence, is one of the most powerful actions you will ever take. It shapes your reactions, shifts your confidence, and becomes the way you carry yourself through the world. Every person you admire for their calm, their discipline, their grounded presence, they weren't born that way. They trained for it. Not just in public, not just when life demanded it, but in the dark, when it was quiet and no one was watching. That is when real change happens. That is where your power lives, in what you choose to think when the day is done. It is about aligning with thoughts that are true, thoughts that pull you toward your better nature. Thoughts like, "I am allowed to let go of what I can't control," or "This setback does not define me," or even just the simple recognition, "I made it through today, and I am still here." These are not fantasies. They are truths we forget in the noise of the day but remember in the quiet of the night, if we only give ourselves the chance. Socrates once urged his students to care more for the soul than for the body. But how many of us care for our soul before bed? We brush our teeth, we set our alarms, but we do not cleanse the mind. We don't pause to check what stories we are about to reinforce, and then we wonder why life feels like it's happening to us instead of through us. This is not fate. It is habit. It is repetition. It's letting old thoughts command the stage because we never chose new ones before the curtain closed. This is why reflection at night matters, not for guilt or shame, but for clarity. You ask yourself, what am I holding on to that no longer serves me? And even if you don't have all the answers, just asking that question opens the door. It tells your subconscious mind, I am willing to grow. I am willing to see this differently. And that willingness is powerful, because change does not need perfection. It needs intention. When you go to sleep carrying peace, you wake up with power. Not power over other people, but power over your own mind. The power to respond instead of react. The power to stay grounded when others are chaotic. The power to choose your next step, even when fear is whispering in your ear. That kind of strength doesn't come from willpower alone. It comes from planting the right thoughts during the hours no one sees. The reality you will live tomorrow is being written by the thoughts you entertain tonight. That is not a warning. It is a gift. It means you are not stuck. You are not doomed to repeat the same emotional stories. You can intervene. You can rewrite your life, one thought at a time, one night at a time. The mind never stops working, so give it something worthy of its labor. That is the hidden power of the night. Not just to rest, but to realign. Not just to escape, but to evolve. If you let that truth in, really let it in, you will stop treating sleep like an end and start seeing it as a beginning. Overthinking wears a clever disguise. It shows up looking like concern, preparation, responsibility. It tells you that you're just being thorough, making sure nothing goes wrong. But behind that mask, overthinking is quietly draining your energy and your confidence. It pretends to protect you while secretly imprisoning you inside a mental loop with no exit. What seems like reflection is actually rumination, thoughts spinning in circles, never landing anywhere useful. Reflection helps you grow. It brings clarity, acceptance, and sometimes resolution. But overthinking keeps you stuck. You replay the same conversation, analyzing every word. You predict disasters that have not happened. You create arguments in your head that you will never actually have. It is mental noise, not mental clarity. And the more time you spend there, the harder it becomes to trust yourself, because every decision is now filtered through fear. Aristotle taught that the energy of the mind is the essence of life. That energy, when wasted on repetitive, unproductive thinking, leaves you drained before you have even started your day. You wake up already behind, already worried, already rehearsing conversations or outcomes that may never come. This is not clarity. It is cognitive exhaustion dressed up as responsibility. The danger of overthinking is that it feels productive. You think you're solving something. You believe that if you can just figure it out now, at 2 a.m, in the dark, you'll be at peace. But peace does not come from control. It comes from trust. It comes from letting your thoughts pass like clouds rather than trying to grab each one and examine it under a microscope. Not everything requires analysis. Not every feeling deserves your full attention. Carl Jung warned, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." That is what overthinking does. It amplifies the very thing you are trying to resolve. You start with one small worry, and within minutes it has grown teeth. Suddenly your mind is racing through every failure, every rejection, every fear. You are no longer thinking. You are reacting to imagined scenarios that your body now treats as real. There is a subtle but crucial difference between awareness and obsession. Reflection asks, what can I learn from this? Overthinking asks, what could go wrong with this? Reflection opens a window. Overthinking shuts a door and traps you inside. It leads to self-doubt, hesitation, and often paralysis. You end up avoiding action altogether because no option feels safe anymore. And so, ironically, the very thing you were trying to prevent, failure, rejection, regret, becomes more likely because you are too frozen to move. The Stoics had no patience for this kind of mental indulgence. Epictetus taught that it's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Overthinking is the habit of misjudgment. You assume the worst. You give weight to possibilities instead of facts. You respond not to what is, but to what might be. And in doing so, you create your own suffering. So how do you stop? Not by force. Not by yelling at yourself to just relax. That never works. The key is to gently shift the mind's focus. First, you observe. You say to yourself, I see this thought. I don't have to follow it. And then you redirect, perhaps to your breath, perhaps to a single grounding truth like, I do not need to solve everything right now. One powerful practice is to categorize your thoughts. When a worry arises, ask yourself, is this useful? If it's something you can act on, something within your control, it is worth keeping. If it is outside your control or based on fear, let it go. Don't argue with it. Don't try to suppress it. Just don't give it fuel. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Overthinking happens when we reverse that, when we try to control outside events with our mind, believing that thinking hard enough will protect us from pain. But pain is part of life, and thinking about it endlessly will not prevent it. It just brings the suffering forward before it has even arrived. Reflection is a flashlight. Overthinking is a strobe light. One helps you see, the other blinds you. The goal is not to stop thinking. It is to think better, to choose thoughts that serve you, that guide you, that calm you. Let your mind rest. Let it process without interference. Your subconscious is wise. It knows what to do if you will just stop interrupting it with noise. Before bed, this matters even more, because your mind does not turn off when you sleep. It continues to process whatever you last gave it. If you feed it fear, it will echo fear all night. If you feed it clarity, it will settle. This is not just philosophy. It is neuroscience. Your brain consolidates memories and emotions while you sleep. What you think about at night becomes your emotional reality by morning. That is why overthinking at night is one of the most damaging habits you can carry. It poisons the subconscious. It keeps your nervous system activated. It denies your body and mind the chance to repair. And when repeated often enough, it becomes a default setting. You stop being a thinker and start being a worrier. That identity shift happens quietly, almost unnoticeably, but it changes everything. But here is the truth most people miss. You are not your thoughts. You are the one watching them. You can step back. You can listen without obeying. You can choose not to follow every story your mind spins. That is where real power begins, not in thinking more, but in thinking less, and with more intention. Overthinking is not intelligence, it is hesitation. It is a symptom of fear dressed up as logic. And once you recognize that, you can start creating space between you and your thoughts. You can say, not now, not this thought, not tonight. And that small moment of distance, that is freedom, that is clarity. That is the beginning of breaking the cycle of self-sabotage and stepping into a life led by intention rather than anxiety. Not because you have silenced your mind, but because you have learned how to guide it. The Stoics understood something about sleep that most of us have completely forgotten. Sleep is not just physical rest. It is mental preparation. It is not just about closing your eyes and shutting off your body. It is about what you carry into the darkness and how that shapes who you become when the light returns. They saw sleep as a sacred transition, a daily death of sorts, where your mind sheds the noise of the day and prepares to rise wiser, calmer, and more in control. In the modern world, we treat sleep like a pause button, a passive activity we do after we have drained every ounce of our attention scrolling, worrying, and racing to fit more into a day that already demands too much. But to the Stoics, sleep was not an escape. It was an opportunity, a time when the soul could return to itself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive." But that insight was not born in the morning. It was prepared the night before, in silence, in reflection, in stillness. He believed in ending each day with thought, with gratitude, and with an inner review, not to punish the self, but to purify it. Because if you do not clear your mind before you rest, you carry that mental clutter into tomorrow. And cluttered minds do not create clear lives. Modern life is obsessed with sleep hacks, blue light filters, weighted blankets, apps that play ocean waves on a loop. But the Stoics did not need tricks. They practiced presence, detachment, and self-discipline. They knew that how you enter sleep shapes how you wake up. They prepared their minds like a warrior sharpens their sword before battle. They did not fall asleep to avoid life. They used sleep to master it. Seneca warned against going to bed without examining the day. He would ask himself, "What did I do right? What did I do wrong? What can I do better tomorrow?" This was not guilt-driven. It was driven by growth, by a desire to live more intentionally, not just exist reactively. He wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." That learning does not stop when the sun goes down. In fact, for the wise, it begins there. Science now confirms what the Stoics intuited centuries ago. The brain organizes information, processes emotion, and even rehearses responses to future challenges, all while you sleep. So whatever emotional state or mental content you bring into that space, your brain treats as important. If you sleep angry, anxious, or scrolling through chaos, your brain stores that emotional tone, and you wake up already shaped by it. This is why the Stoics practiced evening reflection, not because it was spiritual, but because it was strategic. They understood that what you rehearse becomes who you are, and if your final thoughts before sleep are thoughts of fear, comparison, or regret, you are training your subconscious to normalize that chaos. Plato believed the soul was divided into three parts: the rationale, the spirited, and the appetitive. When these were in harmony, a person could live with virtue. But when they were in conflict, inner suffering followed. Nighttime, for the Stoics, was a time to restore that inner harmony, to remind the rational part of its power, to calm the emotional storms, and to quiet the cravings of the body. It was a time to bring everything back to center, so that the next day you did not have to fight yourself. You could just be yourself. But what have we done instead? We have turned bedtime into a battleground. Screens blast us with images. Our thoughts spiral through worries we cannot control. We replay conversations, imagine worst-case scenarios, and let external noise seep into the most vulnerable space of the day. We do not prepare for rest. We collapse into it, hoping for peace without ever creating it. The Stoics would have found that tragic. To them, sleep was a ritual of power, not weakness. It was a time to reconnect with nature's rhythm, to remember that we are not machines meant to run 24/7, but humans built to cycle between action and renewal. Nature does nothing in vain, Aristotle wrote, and that includes sleep. It is not wasted time, it is necessary time. And if you use it well, it does not just heal your body, it refines your mind. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What you feed your unconscious before bed becomes the foundation of your waking life. That is why the Stoics guarded the gate to their sleep. They did not allow anything to enter lightly. They chose their final thoughts with care, because they knew those thoughts would echo long after their eyes had closed. So perhaps it is time to stop treating sleep like a shutdown and start treating it like a ceremony, a daily rite of passage from one version of yourself to the next. You can fill that space with fear or with philosophy, with mindless content or with timeless wisdom. The choice is yours. But what you choose will shape more than just your dreams. It will shape your discipline, your energy, and your emotional resilience, all the things that define who you are when you are awake. And if you seek strength, calm, and control, not as a fantasy, but as a lived experience, it does not start with a productivity hack. It starts with what the Stoics knew all along. How you end your day is how you build your life. And the thoughts you fall asleep with do not just disappear. They become your reality. It is not always the long hours or the endless to-do lists that leave us drained. It is the emotional clutter we carry, quiet, invisible, but heavy. Most people go to bed believing they are just physically tired, but what they are really experiencing is the weight of unspoken frustration, unresolved conversations, and lingering disappointments. It is the kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They knew that true fatigue begins in the mind, not the muscles. And yet today, we rarely think to ask ourselves what emotional baggage we are dragging into the night, or how it is silently shaping the way we wake up. You might have noticed it yourself. You sleep for 8 hours, but wake up feeling as if you have not rested at all. That is not just poor sleep hygiene. It is the residue of thoughts that were never sorted, of emotions that were never released. Aristotle believed that moderation and balance were the keys to a well-lived life, but emotional imbalance, especially when ignored, accumulates like noise in the background. A single moment of irritation left unaddressed turns into hours of internal replays. A small failure, instead of being let go, morphs into a self-judgment loop that runs even in your dreams. Think about how much space these emotions take up. You replay a disagreement from earlier, analyzing what you should have said. You anticipate a meeting tomorrow with dread, rehearsing worst-case scenarios in your head. These thoughts are not productive, but they feel urgent. That is the trap. They masquerade as necessary planning, but they are really just emotional clutter disguised as preparation. Carl Jung warned us that what you resist not only persists, but grows. When we do not acknowledge and release our emotional weight, it does not go away. It compounds. And this is where it gets dangerous. Emotional clutter does not just make you tired, it changes your perception. You become more reactive, more defensive, less creative. The mind, when overloaded with unresolved emotion, starts interpreting even neutral situations through a lens of stress. A simple email feels like a personal attack. A quiet room feels like loneliness. You lose your ability to respond calmly because the internal space needed for clarity is already crowded. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." This is a perfect example. Emotional clutter creates imaginary battles, and then convinces you they are real. Sleep is supposed to be a reset, a full system reboot. But for many, it becomes just another arena where the day's emotions continue to fight for attention. The brain does not shut off at night. It processes, it replays, and it sorts through everything you did not resolve during the day. That is why going to bed without clearing this emotional residue leads to vivid dreams, restlessness, and waking up already in a mental fog. The Stoics would say this is preventable, but only if you are willing to do the work. Not complicated work, but intentional work. A few minutes of genuine self-reflection. A quiet moment to ask, what am I holding on to that I no longer need to carry? This is not about suppressing emotions. It is about detaching from them with clarity. There is a difference between feeling something and being consumed by it. The Stoics did not believe in pretending life was always calm. They faced pain, loss, and uncertainty with open eyes. But they trained their minds not to hold on to what could not be controlled. They believed that emotional discipline was not cold, it was courageous. Letting go does not mean you are numb. It means you have chosen peace over chaos, clarity over clutter. And do not underestimate how fast emotional clutter builds. It does not take major life events. It builds from the little things, a moment of self-doubt, a comment from someone that landed wrong, a task you did not finish and now feel guilty about. Left unchecked, these things stack up silently until the weight becomes unbearable. But because we are used to this internal noise, we normalize it. We tell ourselves, it's just stress, it's just life. But it is not. It is accumulated, unattended emotional energy that has not been processed or released. This is why the Stoics emphasized daily mental hygiene. Just as you wash your face and brush your teeth, they believed in cleansing the mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say or think or do, only what you do." That tranquility does not appear by accident. It is the result of intentional clearing, every night, before the clutter turns into fatigue, burnout, or emotional numbness. You do not need an hour. You do not need a ritual with candles and soft music. You need awareness. You need honesty. You need to be willing to sit with your thoughts, feel what needs to be felt, and then release what no longer serves a purpose. Ask yourself, did anything today make me feel small, angry, insecure, or ashamed? Not to dwell, but to identify. Because the moment you name it, you give yourself the power to release it. This practice becomes even more important when life feels overwhelming. When everything is moving fast, emotional clutter builds even faster. That is when stillness becomes not a luxury, but a necessity. And you will not find that stillness by accident. You must create it. The mind is a canvas, and the final moments before sleep are when its colors set deepest. This is the hour of its greatest vulnerability, but also its greatest potential for transformation. Just as you would not lie down to rest in the clothes of a long day, you must not carry the day's burdens into your dreams. Do not go to bed with a mind cluttered by thoughts that steal your peace. Consider emotional clarity a form of strength, one not forged in grand battles, but built quietly in the small, decisive moments of the mind. It is the choice not to replay an insult on an endless loop, the choice to set down an insecurity you've carried all day, the choice not to give power to a fear that exists only in shadow. Every decision you make in the quiet of the evening either adds to the weight of your thoughts or clears a path toward tranquility. And here lies the profound beauty of this practice. You don't need to solve everything before you sleep. You only need to release the illusion that you must. Plato wisely taught that the first and greatest victory is to conquer the self. But emotional clutter makes this victory impossible, for it keeps you locked in a silent war with your own mind, your own past, and your own fears. The path to this inner peace is not a complex one. It is a simple, moment-by-moment choice. To release, to cease arguing with reality, to loosen your grip on what is already gone. You will know this process has begun when the need to win silent arguments in your head dissolves, when the obsession over what someone meant or how you appeared simply fades away. A lightness will begin to settle within you, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You have begun to understand that peace comes not from controlling every detail, but from refusing to be ruled by thoughts that exist only to exhaust you. For the true source of our exhaustion is not our schedule, our responsibilities, or even the chaos around us. It is the chaos within, and it can be cleared night after night, choice by choice, until you wake not just rested, but free. When we feel overwhelmed, our instinct is to add more motivation, more goals, more productivity hacks. But what if the true path to clarity isn't about adding anything at all? What if it is about the profound act of letting go? This is the very heart of a mental detox. It is not some modern trend, but a return to something deeply human, a practice the Stoics held sacred, the ability to clear the mind, not just fill it, to free yourself, not merely fix yourself. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And there lies the key. It is not what happens to you that defines your peace, but what you choose to carry. Letting go is not an act of forgetting, nor is it a pretense that no harm was done. It is a quiet permission you grant yourself to set down a burden that has already left its mark. Consider for a moment all that you are holding on to. Past regrets, the weight of another's opinion, the fear of not being enough. These are not facts. They are anchors. Invisible, yes, but your nervous system treats them as real. Your shoulders tense, your breath grows shallow, your sleep becomes a fragile thing. For even when the moment has passed, its residue remains. This mental clutter, left unchecked, multiplies. A single insecurity can blossom into a cascade of negative thoughts. Carl Jung gave us a stark warning. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Letting go protects you from this fate, from living under the illusion that you are your emotions. They are not you. They are visitors, and like any guest, not all of them deserve to stay. The process begins with awareness, for you cannot release what you refuse to name. This is the quiet power of journaling. It doesn't magically solve your problems, but it serves a more profound purpose. It pulls the chaos from your mind and gives it a form, separate from you. In the act of writing, a detachment occurs. It is a way of saying, this experience belongs to me, but it is not me. In that space, clarity begins to grow, not with a sudden flash, but with a steady, honest light. The next step is acceptance. You must understand that not everything you hold will come with closure. Some apologies will never arrive. Some situations will never make sense. Letting go does not mean you understand it all. It means you have decided that confusion and resentment will no longer pilot your life. Socrates believed an unexamined life was not worth living, but here lies a common misstep. We can examine our pain for so long that we forget to ever release it. The goal is not to dwell in the labyrinth of your experience, but to understand it just enough to say, I have learned what I needed to learn. Now, it is time to move forward. A true mental detox is not a single, dramatic event. It is a quiet, daily practice, much like tidying a room before the day is done. You do not wait for chaos to become unlivable. You maintain order, little by little. A few minutes of silence, a walk without a screen, saying no when you want to please, saying yes when you are afraid. These acts may seem small, but each is a clear message to your mind. I am no longer here to carry what does not serve me. This practice does not make you soft. It sharpens your focus. You begin to see what truly matters, realizing that not every thought deserves your time. Not every emotion warrants a response, and not every battle requires your energy. It is here we find the wisdom of Aristotle, who taught that virtue lies in the balance between extremes. Letting go is that very balance, between caring and obsessing, between responsibility and self-sacrifice, between awareness and the illusion of control. A unique strength is born from releasing something painful, not because the pain wasn't real, but because you are choosing peace over the need for proof. You simply decide that peace is more valuable than being right, that clarity is more powerful than closure, and that your own mind, above all, deserves to be free. This is a deep form of trust, trusting that what lies behind you need not be dragged forward, trusting that your mind is most powerful when it is not crowded, trusting that letting go is not loss, but liberation. And when you begin this practice, even in the smallest of ways, you will notice something shift. You will breathe deeper. Your thoughts will slow. Your inner voice will become quieter, less chaotic. And in that quiet, you will begin to feel like yourself again. This is what the Stoics sought. Not a perfect life, but a peaceful one. A mind not always chasing, fighting, or replaying, but one that is steady, present, and free. So the next time your mind feels heavy, do not ask what you need to do. Ask, instead, what you are ready to release. That is where your power lives. Most of us go to bed believing we must fix something. The mind remains vigilant, not because there is action to be taken, but because it is unwilling to let a single thought pass unexamined. This is the difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection brings clarity, helping you grow and move forward. Rumination is a trap. It feels productive because of its intensity, but you are only spinning in circles. As Jung said, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. You cannot calm a storm by shouting over the wind, and you cannot settle a mind by adding more thoughts to it. The deepest wisdom sometimes comes from doing nothing, from letting a thought rise and fall without grasping it. Sleep is not the time to sort through your life. It is the time to let it all float by like clouds in an open sky. This is not avoidance. It is wisdom. We have been conditioned to treat every thought as an emergency. But as the Stoic philosopher Epictetus reminded us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And your reaction does not always have to be action. Sometimes, the most powerful reaction is stillness. You release a problem not because it is solved, but because holding on to it is doing more harm than good. Holding on robs you of rest, and without rest, you lose perspective, clarity, and the strength to carry on. The strongest people are not those who hold on to everything, but those who know when to let go. Before bed, you must retrain the mind. Instead of asking, "How do I fix this?" try asking, "Can I let this go for now?" That simple shift makes all the difference. Psychologically, detachment is one of our most powerful tools. It does not mean we stop caring. It means we stop carrying. The energy of the mind, as Aristotle taught, is the essence of life. Where is your energy going? Is it lost in loops you have walked 100 times? Then, perhaps the bravest thing you can do tonight is simply this. Drop it. Set it down and see who you are without its weight. You deserve rest even when things are unresolved. You deserve peace even when the day felt like a failure. That is not weakness. That is strength. The person who can put down their thoughts before sleep is the person who will rise stronger, more focused, and more present. Your mind is not a machine meant to run all night. It is a garden. It needs time to rest, to breathe, to grow. You don't need to solve everything. You just need to trust that peace is possible, even when answers are not. And that is what the Stoics knew, that clarity is found not in holding on tighter, but in releasing the grip, in walking away from the war inside your own head and saying, "Not tonight." In that quiet discipline of surrender, the mind does not collapse, it expands. There is a reason your thoughts feel louder at night. With less noise from the outside world, the mind's inner landscape becomes visible. The worries, the doubts, the unspoken fears, they rise like echoes in an empty room. This silence, as uncomfortable as it may feel, is your greatest opportunity. You don't train a warrior on the battlefield. You train them in quiet repetition. The same is true for the mind. When you are sitting still with your life, not just reacting to it, that is when transformation can occur. As Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The night invites you to look in. Your subconscious becomes more active as you sleep, processing emotions, memories, and beliefs. The thoughts you allow in those final moments are not fleeting. They are carried deeper, settling into your very wiring. This is why the Stoics reflected at night, not to judge themselves, but to program their minds with intention. Marcus Aurelius would sit with his journal and ask, "What did I do well? What could I have done better? What am I holding that needs to be released?" It was not ritual. It was reinforcement. The mind is softest when it is tired. It resists less. It listens more. This is the perfect time to speak truths into it, not loud affirmations, but steady, simple reminders. I have done enough today. Not everything needs to be solved right now. My peace does not depend on perfection. Over time, these statements become anchors. They catch you when you start to spiral. This is how neural pathways are built. Psychology confirms what the Stoics practiced. Repetition rewires. The thoughts you return to most often become your default setting. At night, your conscious guard is down. This is not a weakness, it is a window. The subconscious doesn't respond to passion, it responds to patterns. It doesn't care how inspired you feel in a single moment. It is watching for consistency. Most of what you believe about yourself wasn't chosen. It was learned through slow repetition. If you were repeatedly shown through subtle cues that you weren't good enough, that message sank in not because it was true, but because it was frequent. The brain evaluates truth based on exposure. This is how self-doubt is planted, but it is also how confidence can be rebuilt. When you go to bed with thoughts of inadequacy, those are not just ideas, they are instructions. This is why it is so vital to replace them with deliberate, clear truths. They don't have to feel powerful at first, they just have to be repeated. I can improve. This feeling will pass. I am learning to let go. So the next time your mind feels heavy when the lights go out, do not run from it. That weight is a doorway. Step through it, sit with it, and then gently, deliberately, train your mind to release. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present. This is how the strongest minds are built, not in public, not in daylight, but in the quiet dark, where every thought becomes a seed and every choice a step toward who you were always meant to be. It is not the intensity of a thought that reshapes us, but its frequency. A single, emotionally charged idea may seize your attention for a moment, but it is the repeated thought that truly rewires the landscape of your mind. It sets the default. It becomes the internal voice that speaks before you are even aware of its presence. Herein lies the real power, not in the shout that echoes once, but in the whisper that returns again and again, until it is no longer a sound you hear, but a part of who you are. And that whisper is shaped in the silence, by what you allow yourself to think when no one is watching, especially in the profound quiet of the night. This is not a new discovery. The Stoics understood this intimately. They did not merely think about virtue, they repeated their values daily. Marcus Aurelius did not wait for his world to crumble to remind himself of what mattered. He wrote the same truths, again and again, about impermanence, control, and responsibility. He knew that a single insight, however profound, cannot stand against the tide of daily stress unless it is reinforced. As Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be and then do what you have to do. Saying it once is never enough. You must say it every day. This is not blind repetition. It is not forcing a belief that defies reality. It is about choosing the thoughts that serve you and reinforcing them until your subconscious takes over. Consider how you learned to walk or drive or speak your native tongue. It was through countless tiny repeated movements. Mistakes were made and corrections followed, until one day the brain accepted the pattern and took it from there. The same process applies to emotional discipline, to clarity, and to calm. When you repeat thoughts like, "I can't handle this," your subconscious begins to shape your posture, your tone, and your actions to match that story. But when you consistently offer it a new script, "I am adapting. I have been through worse. Not everything needs a reaction." You are not just speaking differently. You are building new pathways, and in time, your emotional responses begin to change without force. Plato wrote, "The first and best victory is to conquer self. This conquest is achieved through consistent mental training, replacing chaos with structure, one small moment at a time. Repetition is the tool for this work. The quiet ritual of returning to a truth until it no longer feels like an effort, but feels like you. This is how a person becomes grounded, not by chasing peak emotions, but by choosing a message and returning to it until it becomes a part of them. This is why the moments before sleep are so crucial. It is the window when the mind is no longer distracted, no longer resisting. It is soft and open. If you feed it fear, it will rehearse anxiety as you sleep. But if you gently feed it discipline, it will begin to trust that discipline. It will make it the default. So when you wake to the day's challenges, you are not scrambling to remember how to think. You are already thinking from a stronger foundation. Repetition is how a belief becomes an identity, and it works both ways. If you are not choosing your repeated thoughts, something else is. Algorithms, headlines, and unhealed wounds are all eager to offer their scripts. This is not paranoia, it is awareness, and that awareness is your power. So keep it simple. Choose a few truths you wish to embody, not those that offer a momentary high, but those that center you for a lifetime. Write them, speak them, whisper them before you sleep. Because the subconscious does not need to be yelled at. It simply needs to know you are serious. And in the world of the mind, seriousness is measured by repetition. Most people believe identity is forged in the heat of action, when facing a great challenge or making a pivotal decision. But identity is not built in those moments. It is revealed in them. The true construction happens in the quiet, in the dark, when you are not consciously trying to be anything at all. You become who you are not when you are performing, but when you are at rest. All that remains is the story you have silently told yourself 1,000 times. This is the blueprint from which your subconscious builds. The hours before you fall asleep are not passive, they are formative. Your brain does not simply shut off. It reorganizes, reviews, and encodes. The thoughts that linger, especially those repeated with emotional weight, are tagged as important. If you go to sleep every night thinking, "I am not enough," that thought becomes more than a mood. It becomes a filter through which your brain processes reality. It becomes an assumption. And an assumption, left unchecked, hardens into an identity. Aristotle believed we are what we repeatedly do, that excellence is not an act, but a habit. This applies even more deeply to our inner world. We are what we repeatedly think, especially when our guard is down. That is identity. It is what your mind rehearses in the quiet. The problem is, most people never question that rehearsal. They never realize the voice in their head at night is not their truth, but their programming. the echo of a critical parent, a past failure, a story that is no longer theirs to live. This is why the night is not just for rest. It is for rehearsal. Your subconscious replays what it knows best. If you do not interrupt the old patterns, you will find yourself living a life shaped by insecurity instead of clarity. This is not who you are. It is who you became when you stopped paying attention. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." This means being intentional about what you allow to repeat. Think of your subconscious as a garden. Every thought before bed is a seed. You will not see the roots forming, but you will wake up with new habits, new reactions, and new expectations. Identity is not forced into place. It grows slowly and quietly. Most of us fall asleep to noise, scrolling feeds, background shows, the endless hum of unresolved worries. But this noise does not vanish when you close your eyes. It settles within you. It shapes the feeling you wake with. The mind does not need more distraction to find peace. It needs depth. It needs stillness. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If you fall asleep to chaos, you wake in chaos. If you fall asleep to wisdom, you wake with order. This is not poetry. It is neuroplasticity. Your brain is always listening, especially as it winds down. The thoughts you carry into sleep sink deeper than any you repeat during the day, for at night your conscious resistance fades, and the mind absorbs without a fight. What if you replace that noise with something steadier? What if, instead of an anxious loop, you allowed the great thinkers to speak to you before bed? Philosophy is not an abstract subject. It is a training ground for the mind. It teaches you to entertain a thought without accepting it, to pause instead of reacting, to reflect instead of spiraling. When you end your day this way, your mind does not just rest, it resets. And that reset changes everything. You do not need more hacks. You need fewer distractions and more wisdom. Replace scrolling with stillness and noise with philosophy. You will stop waking up tired and start waking up strong. Because in the end, the strongest minds are not built in the daylight. They are shaped in the darkness, in silence and reflection, when no one else is watching. The subconscious does not argue or analyze. It simply absorbs what you give it, consistently and without filter. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is the mechanism by which we sabotage our own peace. The mind rehearses what it knows, and without interruption, it builds a reality from that rehearsal. But the subconscious does not discriminate. That is both the danger and the opportunity. The damage can be done, but it can also be undone. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This realization is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice. The mind forgets, and the subconscious needs reminders. One truth, quietly reinforced every night, becomes a worldview. Your moods, your reactions, your confidence, all are rooted in what your subconscious has come to accept as true. So tonight, as you lay down and your conscious mind begins to drift, remember this: who you become is shaped less by what you do, and more by what you allow yourself to believe. Choose with care, for identity is not who you say you are. It is what your subconscious believes while you are asleep. And that belief is built, night after night, by the thoughts you let in after the world goes quiet. If you fill your mind with grievances and judgment, with the unresolved ghosts of yesterday, and then ask for peace, it will not come. Not because you are unworthy of it, but because you never gave it the space to take root. Your subconscious mind is loyal. It follows the strongest voice, and the strongest voice is always the one you repeat. So give it a better one to follow. Feed it clarity. Offer it stillness. Nurture a mindset grounded in reason, discipline, and truth. Do this not for show, but because it is the foundation of your world. The thoughts you whisper to yourself in the dark will echo through every decision you make in the light. And if you take this responsibility seriously, if you guide your subconscious instead of letting it wander, you will begin to see a profound difference. Not immediately, but inevitably. There is no secret to transformation. There is no shortcut. There is only repetition. There is only the narrative you allow your mind to believe when you are not paying attention. That is what shapes everything. The subconscious does not judge, it only absorbs. So be careful what you feed it, and be even more intentional about what you repeat. Because that is not just the story you are telling yourself, it is the life you are building. When you go to bed in conflict, you do not leave the war behind at the bedroom door. You carry it into your dreams, into your body, into the very rhythm of your breath. You may hope that sleep will grant you an escape, but it offers no such thing. Not when your nervous system is still on high alert, your heart still guarded, your mind still spinning over what was said, what should have been said, what you wish you could take back. The body may rest, but the mind continues the argument in silence. And that silent argument does not heal, it hardens. What began as a small disagreement festers overnight, growing into a story. And stories have power. The subconscious mind does not distinguish between what is happening now and what is being replayed in your head. So if you lie in bed revisiting a painful conversation, that pain embeds itself deeper, not just as a memory, but as a part of your identity. You begin to see yourself through the lens of that single moment, angry, betrayed, misunderstood, defensive. And the next morning, you do not wake up refreshed. You wake up with a mental hangover, still wearing the emotional residue of a night lived in tension. Plato once said, "There is no greater evil one can suffer than to hate reasonable discourse." When we sleep in conflict, we unconsciously reject reason. We allow the emotional brain to seize control, shutting out the wiser part of ourselves, the part capable of reflection, forgiveness, and understanding. And the more nights we spend this way, the more disconnected we become from that inner wisdom. People believe that time will mend emotional wounds, but time does not heal what is constantly being reopened. And every time you mentally revisit that fight, that insult, that moment of misunderstanding, you rip the wound open again. You may not speak it aloud, but your body knows. Your breath shortens, your muscles tighten, your sleep becomes shallow. You wake up tired, not because you did not sleep, but because the war inside you never stopped. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. But what about the over-examined conflict? When you obsessively turn something over in your head, not to learn from it, but merely to relive the pain, what good does it do? It brings no resolution. It creates no clarity. It only traps you in a loop. And your subconscious, quiet and obedient, builds that loop into a pattern. The danger here is not just in feeling bad. It is in training your mind to seek out more conflict. You begin to expect tension. You start seeing it where it isn't. You enter conversations already on the defensive, interpreting neutral actions as attacks. This is how conflict becomes not just something you experience, but something you carry, a lens through which you see your relationships, your work, and yourself. Now here is the truth. Resolution with another person is not always possible before bed. Sometimes the phone call goes unanswered. Sometimes the situation is too fresh, too raw. But even if peace with them is not available, peace with yourself always is. That is the choice we so often forget. You cannot always end the argument, but you can always end the grip it has on you. This does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means reminding yourself that this conflict is not your identity, that anger does not have to be your companion in sleep, that your mind does not need to rehearse pain just because it is available. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." Going to bed in conflict is a form of resistance. It is an attempt to outrun discomfort instead of accepting it, processing it, and releasing what you can. A wise mind does not need everything to be solved right now. It just needs space. And that space begins the moment you choose to put the story down, even if just for tonight. Every night is a chance to reset the emotional tone of your life. If you consistently go to bed in conflict, then conflict will become the emotional default of your days. That is the real danger, when inner tension becomes so normal that peace feels unfamiliar. You wake up ready to defend, not to connect. You live in anticipation of offense. You rehearse old arguments in your head and miss the present moment entirely. And worst of all, you forget what it feels like to rest deeply, not just physically, but emotionally. The Stoics taught that our peace depends not on external events, but on our response to them. As Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That lesson is never more vital than at night, because how you go to sleep is not just a reaction to your day, it is a rehearsal for tomorrow. It programs the emotional baseline your subconscious will follow. So if you want more clarity, more energy, more strength, your work does not begin in the morning. It begins at night. It is in that quiet decision to let go just enough to rest, to breathe a little deeper, to choose silence over the last word, to remind yourself that your peace is worth more than winning an argument that no one is still having, except you. You are not weak for choosing peace. You are not naive for stepping away from conflict. You are wise. You are training your mind to value what truly matters. Because the more nights you spend in stillness, the more days you will wake up grounded. And that is not just healing. That is strength. That is the kind of transformation that does not announce itself, but changes everything. When the world goes quiet and you are left alone with your thoughts, that is when true reflection can begin. But for many, that precious silence is quickly polluted by guilt. Not growth, not insight, just shame disguised as thinking. We mistake overanalysis for wisdom and self-judgment for responsibility. But the truth is, guilt is not clarity. It is noise. And until we learn to reflect without guilt, our self-review will always be colored by pain, rather than by understanding. There is a profound difference between holding yourself accountable and punishing yourself. One leads to growth, the other leads to paralysis. Yet so many of us confuse the two. We lie awake at night, replaying things we said, decisions we made, moments we wish we could change. We call it reflection, but it is actually rumination. We are not learning, we are looping, and that loop keeps us stuck in the very identity we are trying to outgrow. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Guilt operates in the unconscious. It shapes the lens through which we see ourselves. It whispers, "You are not good enough," even when we are doing our best. And if we let that voice go unchecked, our self-reflection turns into self-attack. We become afraid to look honestly at ourselves because we know what awaits us is not clarity, but condemnation. But real reflection is not about proving you are flawed. It is about understanding where you are unconscious and deciding what to do with that new awareness. It is not about tearing yourself down. It is about tuning in to what you were blind to before. It is about catching your patterns with compassion, not a whip. Because change does not come from shame. It comes from truth paired with grace. When you sit in quiet review of your day, the question is not, "What did I mess up?" The question is, "Where was I unaware?" Where did I become reactive? Where did I act out of alignment with my values? That shift in questioning changes everything. It opens the door to responsibility without self-abuse, and it allows you to move forward with power instead of dragging the past like a chain. Socrates said, "An unexamined life is not worth living," but he did not say, "Shame yourself into becoming better." Self-inquiry was his path to wisdom, but it was also his path to freedom. To see clearly, we must stop moralizing our mistakes, stop attaching our self-worth to every error. You made a choice with the awareness you had then. Now, you have more. That is growth. That is evolution. So, why is guilt so addictive? Because it feels like action. It feels like penance. But it is hollow. It does not move energy. It just recycles it. It traps you in a version of yourself that you have already outgrown, and that trap is reinforced every night you go to bed mentally punishing yourself for being human. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth, which never harmed anyone." That is the spirit of honest reflection. Not shame, but correction. Not judgment, but an openness to improvement. You look at yourself not to feel small, but to grow stronger. Night is a sacred time for this kind of review. Your distractions are gone. The external world is not screaming for your attention. You have a rare opportunity to face yourself with honesty. But that moment becomes toxic if guilt hijacks the space. If instead of learning, you are labeling. If instead of evolving, you are hiding behind blame. So how do you make the shift? Start by talking to yourself like someone you want to see win. Use language that opens you up instead of closing you down. Instead of, "I was such an idiot," try, "I see where I lost my awareness." Instead of, "Why do I always do this?" ask, "What triggered that response in me today?" This change in tone rewires the entire process. It allows you to examine your day without shrinking from it. Aristotle believed that excellence is not an act, but a habit. Habits are not built on guilt. They are built on awareness. And awareness is something you can cultivate every night if you let go of the belief that you must be perfect to be worthy. You do not. You just have to be honest. And honesty thrives in a space that is safe, not self-critical. Let your nightly reflection become a ritual of strength. Let it be the time you meet yourself as a student of your own behavior, not as the prosecutor of your flaws. Because when you do that, something powerful happens. Your past stops defining you. Your mistakes stop haunting you. And your mind becomes a place you can trust again. The goal is not to ignore what went wrong. It is to approach it with curiosity instead of shame. To ask, "What did this moment come to teach me?" rather than, "How could I be so foolish?" One creates wisdom, the other creates wounds. And perhaps that is what we have forgotten in our rush to be better. That growth is not about being hard on ourselves. It is about being honest enough to see where we need to shift, and kind enough to believe that we can. So tonight, review your day like a philosopher, not a critic. See your missteps as signals, not as signs of failure. You do not need to be flawless. You simply need to be aware. Because awareness changes behavior, and behavior, repeated, becomes identity. That is how you become someone new, not through guilt, but through conscious self-respect. This is the essence of Stoicism. Not coldness, not perfection, but the courage to face yourself each night and say, "Here is where I can do better, and I will." Without drama, without shame. Just truth, and the will to rise again tomorrow. Detachment is often misunderstood. People hear the word and think of distance, coldness, indifference, as if to be detached means to stop caring. But in truth, detachment is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of power. Real detachment is when you feel everything deeply, but your emotions no longer own you. You see the world clearly, but you are no longer controlled by what you see. You do not shut down, you simply rise above. Stoicism has always taught this distinction. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Detachment is that strength. It is not suppression, it is sovereignty. It means you do not need things to go your way in order to remain steady. You do not collapse when others misunderstand you. You do not chase validation or beg for certainty. You let the world be what it is, and you choose how you will respond. This discipline does not come from rejecting life, it comes from understanding it. The Stoics did not run from experience. They simply refused to let experience shake their inner foundation. They felt everything, but remained rooted in reason. That is what made them immovable, not because they avoided emotion, but because they knew emotion did not have the final word. We live in a time where emotional reactivity is glorified, where being loud about your pain is mistaken for healing, where attachment is labeled as love, and detachment is seen as weakness. But ask yourself, what is stronger? To be consumed by everything that happens to you, or to be able to witness it all without losing your center? Plato said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." Detachment is that victory. It does not mean you don't feel betrayal. It means betrayal no longer defines your sense of self. It does not mean you don't experience disappointment. It means disappointment no longer poisons your direction. Detachment does not make you less human. It makes you more stable. Think about how you react when things fall apart. Do you immediately spiral into blame, resentment, and panic? Or can you pause, observe, and respond with clarity instead of chaos? That pause is detachment. That single breath between impulse and action, that is where your power lives. And yet, detachment is not passive. It is not apathy in disguise. It requires immense attention. You must be able to see your thoughts without getting tangled in them. You must feel your emotions without collapsing into them. You must witness people's behavior without instantly personalizing it. That is not weakness. That is mastery. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Detachment is how we make the unconscious conscious. It is how we stop reacting from old wounds and start choosing from a place of awareness. It is how we shift from being pulled by life to walking through it with intention. And the mind learns this discipline most easily when everything else is quiet. At night, when your body slows and your outer distractions fade, you have the perfect opportunity to practice. Not by turning away from your thoughts, but by watching them without grabbing hold. Not by silencing your emotions, but by seeing them as waves that pass, not as truths that trap. This is why sleep is so powerful. It does not just rest the body, it reveals the mind. And when you go to bed practicing detachment, your subconscious learns to stop clinging, to stop rehearsing arguments, to stop solving problems that are not yours to solve. You teach your entire system that not everything requires a reaction, that sometimes stillness is strength. Aristotle taught that we are what we repeatedly do. So if every night you teach yourself to witness your inner world without being consumed by it, you become someone who carries that peace into the next day. You do not have to fake calm anymore. You become it. Because detachment is not about pretending nothing matters. It is about realizing that not everything deserves your energy. Think of the weight you carry, other people's expectations, your past mistakes, your future fears, the daily stress, all of it pressing down on your nervous system like invisible bricks. Detachment allows you to set that weight down. Not because it does not exist, but because carrying it constantly does not make you stronger. It just makes you tired. When you truly understand this, you stop arguing with reality. You stop clinging to what has hurt you. You stop chasing people who have already left. You stop needing every situation to be fair or every person to understand. You realize that your peace is not found in control. It is found in clarity. And that clarity is what detachment gives you. So, no, detachment is not cold. It is the fire of restraint in a world obsessed with noise. It is what allows you to be present without being pulled apart, to feel deeply and still remain centered, to care without craving, to love without losing yourself. Because the real goal is not to harden. It is to soften so deeply into your own being that nothing external can pull you off balance. That is what the Stoics understood. That is what you can train your mind to do every single night. Not through force, but through focus. Not through resistance, but through letting go. Detachment is not rejection. It is redirection. Away from chaos and toward calm. Away from emotional dependence and toward inner command. That is not coldness. That is power. You have been told that closure is what brings peace. That until you get the apology, the explanation, the conversation that never happened, you will remain stuck. But what if that very belief is the thing keeping you trapped? What if waiting for closure is just another way the mind delays its own healing? The truth is, closure is rarely something another person can give you. More often than not, it is something you must decide to give yourself. You do not need someone to validate your pain in order to release it. You do not need all the answers before you can find rest. Sometimes, the answer is silence. And learning to find peace in that silence, that is real strength. We think that closure means finally getting the story to make sense. But not everything will make sense. Some people leave in the middle of a sentence. Some situations end without justice. Some truths remain hidden, and some wounds never get the explanation they deserved. But life does not pause until we get closure. The mind, however, will try to. It will loop the memories, replay the moment, revisit the words over and over like a broken record, as if running the scene one more time will finally rewrite the ending. But all it does is keep you anchored to the pain. Carl Jung wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." This applies perfectly to our search for closure. The more you demand it from others, the more power you give to something outside of yourself. And ironically, it is that very sense of powerlessness that steals your peace. Because how can you possibly rest when your sense of calm depends on someone else doing what they have already proven they will not do? Real closure does not arrive when they finally explain themselves. It arrives when you stop needing them to. It comes when you realize that understanding why someone hurt you does not always make it hurt less. That even if you received the perfect apology, it would not rewind time and erase the pain. It comes when you accept that healing is not a perfect puzzle where every piece finds its place. Sometimes healing is about learning to live with a few missing pieces and finding peace anyway. You can choose to stop bleeding into your future from a wound that can no longer be changed. Socrates once warned of the barrenness of a busy life. This includes a mentally busy life, one where the mind never rests, forever chasing something it doesn't truly need. In this state, closure becomes a phantom. You reach for it, but it's never quite there. And yet, if you pause, if you stop running the mental scripts, you will realize something profound. You already have everything you need to set your burden down. When you're lying awake at night, replaying what they should have said or what you should have done, ask yourself this: what do I truly want from this thought? Most of the time, the answer is reassurance. Reassurance that you were enough, that you were right, that what happened to you wasn't fair. But you don't need a replay to know your worth, and you don't need fairness to choose rest. Rest does not come from fixing the past. It comes from no longer needing to. It comes from seeing your pain without trying to edit it, from facing the void without needing to fill it. It is the acceptance that you may never fully understand why, but that understanding was never a requirement for moving forward. Aristotle believed that excellence is a habit, not a single act. One of the greatest habits you can build is that of internal, emotional closure. This means making peace with unfinished stories, with unanswered questions, with people who could not love you right. It means saying to yourself, I see this, I accept this, and I will carry it no further. You can train your mind to do this every night. You can give yourself closure by ending the mental argument, by breathing through the urge to rewind, by choosing stillness over resolution. Because often it is the clinging that keeps the wound open, not the event itself. The Stoics never waited for closure. They waited for nothing. Epictetus taught that freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and it is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And closure, when demanded from others, lies squarely beyond your control. You don't need them to make it right. You only need to stop making it yours to fix. This doesn't mean you pretend it didn't happen. It means you honor its impact, but you refuse to be defined by it. It means you stop tying your healing to someone else's awakening. You grieve, you feel, you learn, and then you release. Because at some point, this is no longer about the past. It's about your nervous system. Your mind cannot recharge if it carries conflict into sleep each night, if it holds its breath waiting for a resolution that will never come. Rest is a decision. You choose to release, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. Think about it. The people who wronged you are not losing sleep. The past is not lying awake with you, but you are. You are the one reliving, rethinking, reattaching. Closure is what you give yourself when you finally decide to stop needing the pain to make sense. It is when you stop asking, why did this happen? And start asking, what can I choose now? That is where your power lies. Not in the answer, but in the choice. You can choose to put the thought down. You can choose to rest, not because everything is resolved, but because you are done letting the unresolved run your life. This is what the mind learns when you stop feeding it unfinished business before bed. It learns that freedom isn't found in clarity, but in release. And when you do this, night after night, something shifts. Your brain begins to heal because it finally has room to. Your emotions begin to calm because they are no longer stirred by what-ifs. You don't just sleep. You renew because you are no longer clinging to an ending that was never yours to write. Closure isn't found in the past. It is created in the present. It's not a gift. It's a boundary. It says, this ends here, not because everything is perfect, but because you are ready to be free. And that freedom is what finally lets you rest. All day long, we avoid a fundamental truth. We distract ourselves with to-do lists, numb ourselves with screens, and hide in the illusion of control. But when the lights go out and the world quiets down, that truth still hums beneath the surface. You will not be here forever. And though most people fear that thought, the Stoics saw it differently. For them, it wasn't morbid. It was clarifying. It wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. This is not a suggestion to live in fear, but an invitation to live in focus. Because when you carry the weight of mortality with you, not as panic but as perspective, you begin to shed everything that doesn't matter. When you allow that awareness to guide you into sleep, something powerful happens. The mind stops chasing noise and starts organizing truth. Mortality is the ultimate anchor. It strips away false urgency and reveals what is actually urgent: peace, purpose, presence. It's at night, when we're most vulnerable, that this realization often arrives. This is why so many feel uneasy before bed. It's not just overthinking. It's the quiet arrival of mortality, reminding us, you are temporary. What are you doing with this time? Most people fight this. They push it away with distractions, scrolling, talking, planning, worrying. But the Stoic mind does something else. It listens. It allows mortality to shape the evening, not sabotage it. And that shaping sharpens your focus. Because when you truly understand that this might be your last night, and one day it will be, you begin to treat your inner world differently. You stop wasting energy on petty conflict. You stop giving your mind to bitterness, to unresolved drama, to imagined futures. Mortality makes the mind minimal. It trims the excess. You fall asleep not with clutter, but with clarity. And in that clarity, you become stronger. Carl Jung once said, "A man who is unconscious of the laws of his own being is at the mercy of chance." Mortality makes you conscious. It brings urgency not to external things, but to your internal state. It doesn't rush your actions. It refines your attention. Suddenly, the things you were obsessing about feel lighter, not because they're solved, but because they have been put in their proper place. Plato believed that philosophy was a preparation for death, not in a sense of morbidity, but of mastery. And what is sleep, if not a nightly rehearsal of letting go? Each time we close our eyes, we practice surrender. That surrender becomes meaningful when it is tied to purpose, when it is done with awareness, when we fall asleep not to escape life, but to align ourselves with its truth. This is why rituals matter, not for superstition, but for attention. When you set aside a few minutes before bed to reflect, to breathe, to check in with what actually matters, you are not just relaxing. You are sharpening. You are turning the mind from reactive to reflective. And if you have ever laid awake haunted by a strange sense of urgency, the feeling that you should be doing more, becoming more, understand this. That is not anxiety. That is the part of you waking up to life. The discomfort isn't a problem. It's a pointer. It means your mind knows you don't have forever. And that realization, when respected, can become your compass, not your burden. As Seneca wrote, "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Not peace, not presence, not inner work." The paradox is this: when you carry mortality into sleep, you don't become heavy. You become light, because you stop carrying things that don't matter. You stop mentally packing for a future you may never meet. You stop wasting the last conscious moments of your day on fear or regret. So, let this thought walk with you into sleep. If this were your last night, would these thoughts be worthy of being your last? If the answer is no, change the script. You can shift from noise to stillness, from grasping to grace, from fear to freedom. Because the greatest clarity comes not from overthinking, but from remembering what truly matters. When you allow mortality to sit quietly beside you at night, not as a threat, but as a teacher, you begin to sleep like a philosopher. You close your eyes not to forget life, but to absorb it more fully. You don't just rest, you reset. You don't just recover, you return to the core of who you are. And that is how a Stoic sleeps, not with denial, not with distraction, but with the humble power of someone who knows the clock is ticking and is grateful enough to make peace with the silence. There is a vast difference between collapsing into sleep and surrendering to it with strength. Most people end the day by shutting down, not reflecting, just escaping. But if you let the day end without pausing to extract anything from it, no insight, no growth, no gratitude, it means you survived, but you did not evolve. You made it through, but you did not rise through it. And over time, this quiet pattern of neglect becomes a life lived passively rather than powerfully. Stoicism was not built for perfect people. It was built for real people, flawed, struggling, uncertain. And that is why it is so transformative. It doesn't demand that your days go smoothly. It only asks that you respond to them with awareness. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And that reaction begins not in the moment of conflict, but in the moment after, when the dust settles and you are left with your thoughts. This is where the real shaping begins. We are taught to end the day by turning off our phones, our brains, our emotions. But the Stoic path does not end in silence. It ends in sense-making. It ends in taking what happened today and asking, what part of this will I carry into tomorrow, and what part will I leave here? This single act of reflection separates reactive minds from refined ones. But here is where most get it wrong. They mistake rumination for reflection. Rumination is replaying arguments and rehearsing regrets. Reflection seeks clarity. Rumination seeks control. One frees you, the other traps you, and you can feel the difference. When you reflect, your breath slows. Your emotions soften. You are not clinging. You are cleansing. Let the day teach you, not with a lecture, but with a whisper. What drained you today? What lifted you? Who did you become, even slightly because of what you faced? Most people never ask these questions. They believe they are too tired. But the truth is, they are tired because they do not ask, because they carry every unresolved moment with them into the night, and a mind is heavy when nothing is sorted. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." This is not an insult, it's a challenge. Because if you do not examine your life, you do not own it. You are not living, you are looping. That is why the night is sacred. It gives you the one thing the day rarely does. Space. Space to breathe, to think, to process without performing. And in that space, there is power. The quiet, enduring kind that grows every time you choose awareness over avoidance. Even if today was hard, even if it broke you a little, it was not wasted. Pain does not make a day worthless. But ignoring the lesson inside that pain, that is the real loss. And you don't need a journal or an elaborate ritual. All you need is a moment, a willingness to listen, to ask not, why did this happen to me? But, what did this reveal in me? And if the answer is something you don't like, good. Now you know. Now you have something to work with. The point is not to be perfect, it is to be present. That is what Stoicism is about. Not suppressing emotion, but transforming it. Not avoiding the hard parts of life, but extracting strength from them. At the end of the day, you are left with yourself. And that moment, brushing your teeth, lying in bed, staring into the dark, is not just routine. It is reflection. It is where your mind decides what story it will carry forward. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." But what do you repeatedly think before bed? Are you feeding your mind old guilt, petty frustrations, unresolved fears? Or are you teaching it to grow, to see patterns, to let go? Let the day teach you, even if all it taught you is what not to repeat. Even if the only win you had was that you made it through, that is enough. Because growth doesn't always look like confidence. Sometimes it looks like honesty, like admitting you snapped, like noticing your envy. like catching yourself in self-pity and choosing not to stay there. That is quiet, lasting growth. So tonight, do not let the day end you. Sit with it. Look it in the eye. You don't need all the answers. You just need to be willing to listen to what your life is trying to teach you. And in that willingness, you become something rare. A person who walks through life not with arrogance, but with awareness. And that, in the end, is the mark of true strength. Most people wake up reacting, not thinking, not choosing, just responding like a machine programmed by yesterday's noise. The alarm goes off, and their mind is already racing with what they forgot, what they're behind on, what someone said or failed to say. Their feet hit the floor, but their thoughts never had a chance to align. That is why they feel drained before the day even begins. It's not the morning that's broken. It's the programming. But when you wake up with a trained mind, everything changes. You are no longer pulled by impulses or other people's energy. You move with intention, not perfectly, but consciously. That is a superpower in today's world. Powerful not because it is loud, but because it is consistent. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive. Not to be busy, not to be validated, to be alive." That awareness alone changes how you carry yourself. Because a trained mind in the morning is born from what you feed it at night. Sleep doesn't erase your thoughts. It incubates them. It takes whatever mental pattern you fall asleep with and strengthens it. This is not spirituality. It's neuroscience. Your subconscious brain reviews the day, encodes memory, and reinforces thought loops while you rest. So if you fall asleep with worry, resentment, and distraction, that is what gets rehearsed. You will wake up heavy, even after 8 hours. But if you train your mind to settle into sleep with clarity and calm, you wake up with less noise, less emotional fog, and more presence. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When you train the unconscious through nightly intention, it no longer directs your life blindly. You lead it. You don't need morning hacks if your mind is already grounded before sunrise. A trained mind doesn't need to be forced. It flows. It's not about getting rid of hard thoughts. It's about deciding which ones deserve your attention. When you wake up with a trained mind, you are not just alert. You are aware. You notice the first emotion before it takes over. You hear the thought before it spirals. And in that tiny space between stimulus and response, you gain power. A calm power. One that doesn't flinch under pressure, chase validation, or fear being misunderstood. It is the power that comes from self-command, from knowing that your inner world sets the tone for everything else. The weather will turn, the inbox will fill, the news will break. These external tides will always rise. But your response, that is yours alone. It belongs to you, because your mind was forged in quiet, long before the world had a chance to pull you from your center. This is a truth the modern world often forgets. Discipline does not begin with action, but with thought. And this inner work is not confined to the light of day. It continues into the stillness of the night. The subtle affirmations whispered to oneself, the quiet resolutions to forgive, the unseen pivot from anger to awareness. These are the moments that tune your inner rhythm, and in time, that rhythm becomes the melody of your life. And so, to wake with a prepared mind is a profound advantage. It is not a promise of an easy life, but the assurance of an unshakable self. You do not need a perfect routine. You need a prepared mind. A mind shaped not by the chaos of panic, but by the stillness of peace. A mind that does not chase the world, but confidently leads itself through it. This kind of mind, one that remains sharp, still, and self-directed, becomes your greatest asset. It is your anchor in the storm, your compass in the fog, your sharpest edge. For when the world moves fast, the steady soul prevails. When the world is loud, the centered voice is heard. And when all feels like chaos, the trained mind rises, not with force, but with clarity. This is not magic, nor is it luck. It is mental preparation, forged in the quiet moments, especially in the final moments before sleep. It is here you ensure that when morning comes, you do not simply wake up, you rise. You move not with panic, but with power. The day does not define you. You define the day, and that definition begins in the quiet when no one is watching and the world is still. It is in this sacred silence that strength is forged, that peace is planted, and that your true power takes root. So tonight, give your mind something noble to hold on to as it rests. Allow it to carry wisdom into your dreams, and you will wake with a mind that is not only clear, but unconquered. If this message brought you a moment of peace, the video waiting on your screen was created to explore these ideas even more deeply. Thank you for being here and for being a part of the Stoic Journal. Return whenever you need to find your center. We will be here.